You weren't trying to invent a time machine, you were just microwaving a burrito, with the foil still on. One spark, one blown fuse, and suddenly you're flung through history into the absolute worst moments humans have ever faced. You thought today was bad? Oh, you have no idea. And this is one of the weirdest scripts I've ever seen, even for infographics. I guess we better see how this one plays out. 1994. You stumble out of your burrito-scented microwave time machine straight into the mid-90s. You can't believe it. You've actually time traveled. The possibilities are endless. There are so many possibilities. Simba, the Lion King, you could even check out the first episode of Friends. Or you could play it smart. You got $100 in your wallet, your life savings because, well, you're a millennial with 2 kids, invested in Microsoft in 1994, and it could be $25,000 by the time you get home. Reinvest wisely and you're basically a genius. But just as you're plotting your fortune, a crack, a whistle, and a bullet zips right past your ear. You're not in a queue to see Simba, you're in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The city is a war zone. Locals are living through absolute hell as Bosnian Serb forces lay siege. The conflict will kill 14,000 people in Sarajevo alone, and over 100,000 across Bosnia. History would later call it the Bosnian Genocide, wiping out around 3% of the Bosniak population. And right now you're standing in the middle of Sniper Alley. People have experienced unimaginable horrors. Constant shelling has torn down buildings and streets, killing indiscriminately. Cold and starvation kill the young and the vulnerable, and Serbian snipers nested in high places shoot anything that moves. But there is sadly almost always a genocide going on somewhere in the world. What makes 1994 particularly grim is this wasn't even the only one. Another is just starting, and somehow it would be even worse. In Rwanda, racial tensions between the Hutus and Tutsis have reached the mother of all boiling points. Between April and July, Hutu militias will launch a genocidal campaign against the Tutsi and anyone, Hutu or Twa, that tried to protect them. It's a chapter that will forever stain humanity's soul. Up to 50,000 Hutu death squad members armed with machetes moved from town to town slaughtering with reckless abandon. They would wipe out anywhere from 500,000 to 662,000 innocent Tutsis, according to most modern estimates. To put that into perspective, 60 to 70% of the Tutsis in Rwanda will die, and around 7% of Rwanda's overall population. 1994 is also roughly the midpoint of the brutal Sri Lankan Civil War, which ran from 1983 to 2009 and killed and displaced countless people. Russia invaded Chechnya, dropping a domino that would lead to the war in Ukraine. Luis Donaldo Colosio, a leading Mexican presidential candidate, was assassinated in Tijuana. Estonia saw one of the worst maritime disasters of the entire 20th century when a passenger ferry sank, killing 852 people. And things weren't exactly going well in the US either. 1994 saw the Great Bond Massacre, an economic crisis that wiped out $1.5 trillion in value and was described by many as the worst financial event for bond investors since 1927. The prison population in the US also exceeded 1 million people for the first time ever. And on a much more low-level note, clearly murder was in the air because it was also the year that O.J. Simpson decided to go all Michael Myers on his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and waiter Ron Goldman. But the glove didn't fit, so O.J. was acquitted. Convenient. John Salvi III went on his Massachusetts killing spree, and Jeff Bezos kicked off his long-term murder of the American brick-and-mortar business with the founding of Amazon. But the shelling and the snipers are more of a concern to you, so you fire up the time machine and it shakes violently. The world around you melts into streaks of light, and you have no idea where or when you're about to land. 1939 to 1945, World War II. You arrive in the burnt-out husk of what was once Dresden, Germany, after the Allied firebombing that left 25,000 people as unidentifiable charred corpses. All among you is the smell of burnt flesh, the cries of the wounded and dying, and the air thick with smog. It's still the deadliest war in history, and hopefully nothing ever tops it. 70 to 85 million deaths in a 6-year period, wiping out almost 4% of the global human population at the time. And of course, buried in all of that are some of humanity's worst atrocities: the Holocaust, Imperial Japan's horrific crimes in China and Korea, and the Bengal famine of 1943, where hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, starved after the British cut off food supplies. Because of the whole world nature of World War II, there's almost nowhere that is a nice place to be. The UK is being battered by the Blitz and having to tighten their belts due to rationing. Millions of healthy men of conscription age in the US are being shipped off to fight in Europe or the Pacific Theater. The Nazis were ravaging Europe on 2 fronts while the Soviets marched in from the east. Imperial Japan terrorized Asia with mass murder and human experimentation. Massacres, famine, occupation, genocide. Everywhere you looked, something unimaginably terrifying was happening. And while the Axis powers were definitely the antagonizing forces here, the Allies were just as eager to rack up war crimes and inhuman acts while trying to desperately turn the tide of the war in their favor. And it all culminated in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki that killed 150,000 to 246,000 people, most of them civilians, and even over 20 Allied prisoners of war. It also opened the door for nuclear proliferation, the thing that increases the possibility that the next war might be the one that ends humanity. So, yeah, not a great time to be alive, and definitely not one that you feel like sticking around for. The next stop has to be better than this, right? But before you time hop, if you love hearing about man-made horrors beyond your comprehension, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We specialize in showing you the absolute darkness of humanity's underbelly, and much like these atrocities, our videos are entirely human-made. 1418 to 1620. Ah, the age of discovery. But don't let the name fool you. This was one of the absolute low points for humanity as a whole, where tens of millions were murdered, and even the ones doing well had the eternal moral curse of blood on their hands. And as the salt air hits your face, you realize you seem to be on a Spanish galleon, part of the legendary treasure fleet. Luckily, everyone is too busy to notice you. This roughly 200-year period changed the nature of human culture on the planet Earth forever, and it wiped out a huge number of entire cultures in its wake. There was the genocide of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. The British, Dutch, and French massacred Native Americans, spreading disease and destroying food sources. It was a concentrated campaign of death on an unimaginable scale. Tens of millions died from disease transmission. Modern researchers have discovered that Europeans killed so many indigenous people, it altered the global climate. The 1500s also saw the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade, one of the most horrific parts of human history. The lives of black and brown people were treated as little more than commodities for white slavers, causing an unaccountable amount of death and suffering. Things were even violent in parts of the world that Europe wasn't getting its grubby little blood-stained fingers on. Over in Japan, they were in the middle of the Sengoku period, where warring clans of samurai were vying for dominance, leading to constant death, famine, and economic and political instability. It was also a golden period for tsujigiri, or crossroads killings. If a samurai received a new sword, they would traditionally break it in by heading out to a crossroads and casually murdering a civilian with it. Because of the lack of central authority and the prestige of the samurai, it often went unpunished until 1602, when it was made a capital offense. In 1600, a volcano eruption caused a global dip in temperatures, causing crop failures and famines across the globe. This led to even more violence and war on top of all the starvation. Even as this era of unprecedented imperial violence and bloodshed was winding to a close, things were still developing in new and unspeakably gnarly ways. 1618 marked the beginning of the 30-Year War, where millions more died in Central Europe. In some areas, as much as 50% of the population was wiped out as a result of sectarian violence. Sometimes it really does feel like the way of humanity is murder and war. You don't want any part of that, so you do the sensible thing and you get out of there. Third time's a charm. 1918. Better luck next time. Here's a blistering hot take from the infographics show. World War I, not a super fun time. Well, it seems pretty tame compared to the unrelenting horrors of World War II, but the terror of World War I was unimaginable. Trench warfare scarred a generation. 15 to 22 million people dead, 23 million wounded military personnel. People died face down in the mud of no man's land, went mad, were eaten by rats, cut down with machine guns, had their lungs ripped apart from the inside by chemical warfare. Trench warfare wasn't just a battle, it was hell on earth. And as awful as that was, all for what was basically a family spat between European nobility. It gets worse, way worse. They called it the Purple Death, the mysterious new virus that swept across the globe like a reaper's scythe. It was contagious and terrifyingly lethal compared to everything that humanity had faced before. It was shaping up to be one of the worst pandemics in human history. Don't worry, there's more of that coming up. It wiped out over 50 million people across the globe, and that's in just a third of the time that COVID-19 has been around at the time of this video's writing. People were getting sick and dying far faster than anyone could identify and treat them. There were bodies in the streets because they couldn't be buried or burned fast enough. And because the world was in a state of chaos, there was no hope of mounting a coordinated response. Medicine over 100 years ago also wasn't what it is today. In most places, doctors simply had no idea what was killing off all their patients. In the US alone, the Spanish flu killed 675,000 people out of a population of 105 million. The rate of death was so bad that it completely threw off the life expectancy curve, the projected life expectancy dropping by a shocking 12 years. It must have felt like the end of the world for everyone going through it. But ever wondered why they called it the Spanish flu? It wasn't because the flu actually started in Spain, it was because Spain was neutral during World War I, and the media there could report freely about it. Meanwhile, news in the warring countries was heavily censored. People saw the headlines coming in from Spain and they just assumed that's where it began, so the name stuck. You're not dying with your lungs full of fluid like everyone else. You're flung through the unforgiving bowels of space-time, hurtling like a screaming rocket in a cosmic washing machine. Centuries blur and collapse around you, and you just hope that not all of history is bad. 1348. You're dropped into the middle of a street in medieval Bavaria. The dead lie everywhere, blackened skin, dripping buboes, men with wooden carts piling the bodies high, dragging them to mass graves and burning piles. The air is thick with smoke and death. Welcome to the period that could have ended humanity as we know it, the Black Plague. The deadliest pandemic in history, killing between 75 and 200 million people. Europe simply couldn't afford to lose that many lives, but it did. Between 1346 and 1353, 30 to 60% of Europe was wiped out, and it wasn't quick or painless. The bubonic plague was gruesome. The so-called doctors of the time, completely useless. Funny enough, you don't even see any of those guys in the creepy old bird mask robes wandering around. And there's a reason for that. They wouldn't show up until the plague outbreaks of the 17th century. Back during the OG Black Death appearance, the medicine men probably didn't even think to wear masks. Well, technically, this wasn't actually the OG Black Death appearance. More on that soon. You don't feel like sticking around in one of the grossest times to be alive, so you start to plan your next move. Let's hope for somewhere that there isn't abject death and horror. 536. This is scientifically the worst time to be born as a human. But why? Well, the first thing you notice when you wake up on the grim outskirts of Constantinople is how cold and dark it is at 2 p.m. How does that make any kind of sense? It's like the dead of night out here. In this uniquely awful period of time to be a human being, or honestly a living thing in general, a thick fog rolled out across the sky, turning Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia into a kind of international silent hill. The result was darkness during the day and night. Cassiodorus, a Roman politician, described the sun as looking like it had turned blue, adding, "We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon." To the people of the time, it must have felt like a terrible curse had befallen them. It's not just cold here. You're actually in the middle of the coldest decade in 2,300 years, an anomaly in the annals of history. Even in the summer, temperatures dropped 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2.5 degrees Celsius. The horrors stretched from China, where the snow fell in the summer and it smothered the crops underneath, all the way to Ireland, where the chronicles recorded, quote, "a failure of bread from the years 536 to 539. Congrats, you're in the middle of one of the worst global famines the world has ever known, and millions will die because of it. Oh, but there's more. In 541, a case of extremely contagious bubonic plague arrived at the Roman port of Pelusium in Egypt, and it kicked off the plague of Justinian, which would utterly ravage the population of the Eastern Roman Empire. Around a third to a half of its citizens were killed and dragged it towards death's door as a global power. When it comes to the worst global pandemics in history, the plague of Justinian features at number 2, killing between 30 to 50 million. Naturally, you got questions. First and foremost, what happened here? Sky-choking fog, famines, plagues? Did the Romans do something to make God really angry again? For years, we actually didn't know what on earth happened, only that the same circumstances were reported by so many different contemporary sources at once that there was no way it couldn't be true. Though studies into some ice cores in Switzerland back in 2018 gave us a definitive answer to one of history's most troubling mysteries. Back in 536, an astronomically huge volcano erupted in Iceland, belching smog and ash all across the northern hemisphere. The sun vanished. What followed is now called the volcanic winter of 536 and the late antique Little Ice Age, which thanks to some additional eruptions in the 540s lasted until the year 660. Millions died when the global population was tiny by today's standards, and that is just the start. Even if you survived the cold, the famine, dodged the plague, and didn't get run through with a sword by a deranged Byzantine-led zombie, you would have at least had abject poverty to enjoy. Europe wouldn't even begin to recover economically until 640, when silver mining began in earnest across the continent. But you don't feel like waiting around here for a century. You rocket back through the decades, then hundreds, then thousands of years, until you arrive in the snowy climes of North America, 13,000 years back from where you first started. You see a group of ancient Paleo-Americans running toward a mastodon with spears in hand, and you think, oh, why not? So you pick up a spear from the snowy ground and run with them. Eager for more of the worst humanity has to offer? Well, check out Worst Punishments in the History of Mankind by Country, or watch this one instead.